Disclaimer: before commenting, please watch the video. I have nothing against Jesus as an individual, but notice the many contradictions espoused about him by many Christians and the church. Although I understand why many people would want him to be God or attribute God-like characteristics to him, given his uniqueness. Maybe I'm wrong. There's also a lot of misunderstandings concerning the various notions of heaven and hell that I think are important to distinguish. Enjoy.
I remember watching the Zeitgeist film, which delineates many conspiracy theories, and having felt enlightened without actually researching their claims. They compared and contrasted various prophets like Jesus Christ, like Horus of Egypt, like Krishna, and I took it at face value, right? The fact that they were allegedly born of virgins, they had 12 disciples born around the same time. It was also delineating a lot of astrology, kind of using the metaphor of God's sun to describe the rising sun every morning that brings light to the world with its crown of thorns, right? Gliding across the water as though we were walking on water. And I took it at face value. Interesting metaphors. But to borrow a quote from Friedrich Nietzsche, he said that any given interpretation that prevails is a function of power and not of truth. There's so many different interpretations of scripture, various sects, Christianity, Mormonism, Protestantism, Catholicism, Lutheranism, so on and so forth, many of which claim to be the truth, the pure, unadulterated truth that's never been tampered with, right? Islam, for instance. But you want to look at the origins of Christianity. Don't take my word for it, but some things are a little fishy. No pun intended. In any case, that begot my intellectual explosion. I was always very curious, devoutly Catholic growing up. Christianity originated in Israel after the death of Jesus, essentially. And many make the case that, well, Jesus was the Son of God. That's the main claim, right? Even though you find many characters throughout the Bible described as the Son of God, whether it be Adam described as the Son of God, Adam, the word in Hebrew, describing the soil that he rose up from, essentially. It has a lot of like iron deposits, so it's this rich sort of color. And angels were described as the sons of God. The nation of Israel was described as the sons of God. And Jesus claimed, well, me and the Father are one and the same. That doesn't necessarily mean he claimed to be God, right? But implied some sense of unity in God. Now, the notion of heaven and hell. Well, Jesus said to his disciples, the kingdom of heaven is within you. A set of values, a state of being in one's soul. Not necessarily a metaphysical concept, although albeit interesting, right? But Gehenna, or Gehenna, if I'm mispronouncing it, was a valley outside of, or in Israel rather, where that symbolized divine judgment. They would burn corpses. And that was later applied to metaphysics. You had the notion of the world of forms in Platonism, this world of forms that's beauty, where things are perfect and beautiful, that's reflected onto this imperfect reality. It's more of a metaphysical notion, like some compared to the mind, not necessarily a place you go to when you die. There's also the famed legend of Pandora's box in Greek mythology, which bears a striking resemblance to the book of Genesis, and the rebellion and subsequent flood, essentially. The story of Pandora's box delineates how Prometheus warned Pandora not to open the box. It would unleash all the evil into mankind and spoil their souls. She did. And he subsequently casted a flood upon mankind and spared 2 righteous people on, was it Mount Vesuvius? I'm not sure. Don't quote me on this. Essentially, and man was also made from the dust or the ground. You find a similar flood story in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Sumerian story, which is about mainly mortality. There's even some Aztec flood stories you can read about, right? And even serpents were delineated in many cultures. In Aztec mythology, Quetzalcoatl was the bringer of civilization and destruction. The serpent in Genesis, again, he brings knowledge but also destruction. So it kind of plays on this philosophical sort of thought, this philosophical thing I've been grappling with for the longest time, that are some people better off having faith and believing, or are some people better off thinking for themselves? Because there's some individuals who, very wise individuals, who can handle reality, that can handle thinking without becoming corrupt. And there's some people who desperately need some guidance in their life, which is pretty interesting phenomenon that a lot of atheists don't understand. But Genesis, God, Adam and Eve rebelled against God. He sent a flood, spared Noah. Noah built the ark. Gilgamesh also had an ark of sorts. And there you go. This doesn't just apply to Semitic mythologies, but you'd find similarities in other pagan, quote, pagan cultures, right? Like the sky gods of every Indo-European mythology are the same. You find parallels between Zeus, god of thunder, and Thor of Norse mythology, of Perun in Slavic mythology. You find Indra in Hinduism is a sky god. Hinduism encompasses a broader range of different beliefs and traditions. It's not one religion. But even if you read the Dhammapada in Buddhism, you find similar language to other religions. Oh, the notion of Armageddon, good versus evil. This was prominent from time immemorial in many ancient civilizations, especially that of Zoroastrianism, which is an Indo-Aryan belief system of Persia. This also was prominent, I believe, in ancient Egypt. Light versus darkness, good versus evil. This sort of, dichotomy here, whereas a lot of cultures were polytheistic. In fact, in Israel and in Arabia, there was many polytheistic gods. Yahweh was one of many supreme deities in the Hebrew pantheon, and Rome became instrumental in spreading Christianity and, of course, propagating Catholicism, which incorporates, again, a lot of those Greco-Roman ideas, the remnants of Zoroastrianism, probably some from Egypt, given the proximity to Israel, the papacy, essentially. A lot of Catholics, they see the Pope as the representative of God. Essentially, even Pope Francis, he made a speech saying that the kingdom of, or hell rather, is not a place people go to be tortured, the state of being. And that upset a lot of his followers, right? So, again, like Nietzsche describes as slave morality, that Christianity was born of resentful slaves in the Roman Empire. Some even say that actually the Romans invented Jesus, but that it was born of resentful slaves, essentially, who wanted the power of their masters, wanted the fame, the beauty, and all of these things. So they created the notion of hell, this place that their enemies could suffer and be tortured. They can play out their envy in their mind to garner a sense of esteem. And he called this slave morality. And the Romans practiced what was known as master morality, which championed beauty, which championed greatness, which was a warlike culture, of course. And Christianity valued meekness, humility, so on and so forth. Now, valuing these things doesn't necessarily mean you embody them across the board.
One could argue they've only valued these values in relation to their resentment towards their masters.
And what constitutes humility or meekness, again, is interpretive. The Christians ultimately gained the reins of control over Rome. They were no longer very meek, were they?
And even though early Christians ultimately persecuted pagans, modern notions of human rights were influenced by Christianity.
Jesus, being someone who was persecuted and did not harbor animosity on the cross, that is profound. How many people can actually approximate that? Very profound.
And profound, not necessarily always smart in every situation.
So Nietzsche describes Christianity, or at least that variant of it, as slave morality, Sklavenmoral in German. Dionysus, the supreme Greek god of chaos and ecstasy. Dionysus, some people make, and this was delineated in the Zeitgeist film, that some people draw similarities between Dionysus and Jesus, actually, because Dionysus was the god of wine and revelry, and Dionysian traditions Dionysian cults, they would essentially host festivals where they would drink wine, and they would be in this ecstatic dissolution with others, and they would eat flesh, allegedly. So some people attribute that to the eating of flesh and drinking of blood, attributed to the Catholic or Christian tradition associated with worshiping Christ. But again, Jesus was not the type, I don't think, that wanted to be worshipped or deified. Or maybe he did. Some people claim he was like a narcissistic cult leader. The way I see it, it could be either or. I mean, it seems like in many instances that he wanted to help his people. Given like the quote from, given the scene from the Gospel of John, when the adulterous woman is about to be stoned, he kind of questions everyone's convictions, and he says, well, for you who is without sin, cast the first stone. And that got everyone pondering here. But I suppose what they interpret as sin might differ. You know, but I just see this phenomenon in a lot of highly religious communities where people will conceal their cruelty under the guise of religiosity. So they will sin necessarily, but then pray, be absolved. So there's no actual moral development, or there may be moral development, but Nietzsche even, there's another quote attributed to Nietzsche, but essentially to be ashamed of one's immorality, one first must be ashamed of one's morality. So it told people what's moral, but it didn't give them a sense of morality. Like Jesus would have said, the kingdom of heaven is within you. It's a state of being in your heart, in your soul, maybe even in your instincts. That's why Jesus is often seen as superhuman in some sense, because again, he was persecuted on the cross, didn't harbor animosity towards those who harmed him. And is that always something we should approximate? Is anger and envy and all these things evil? I don't think Jesus said so, unless I'm wrong. There's so many different interpretations. I like to play around with metaphysics. I like thinking about if the notion of heaven and hell in the metaphysical sense, or actual spiritual, not spiritual, but metaphysical, spiritual sense were actually real. Like I made this if it were real, would you sacrifice your soul to hell if only to give humanity heaven, or to give humanity life? And a lot of people couldn't really answer it.